Super Paper Mario. Man, talk about a step away from the first two Paper Mario titles. Would you even be surprised if I said it's a controversial entry? I appreciate when a series tries new ideas, but if they're not focused and poorly executed, it makes you wonder why changes were made in the first place. Some of the concepts Super presents are refreshing for the Mario series, but let's not dance around this. Super Paper Mario is teeming with clumsy design choices throughout the whole experience. That's not to say it's all bad, but this direction fumbles so many of its own ideas, it can easily turn away fans of the original Paper Mario style. Still, this game has a decently sized fan base, so ultimately, whether or not it works for you comes down to what you value most about the Paper Mario series: story and concepts, or gameplay and level design. In this video, I'm going to lay out what I found to be the best and the worst aspects of this game. Be warned that full spoilers for Super Paper Mario are on the table. The best. Number 1, novel new ideas. Super Paper Mario surprisingly had a lot of freedom to branch away from traditional Mario themes, with several out-of-the-ordinary scenarios for the Mario universe. You wouldn't know it by the first few chapters, since they're fairly typical settings, but as the game goes on, things get more and more unexpected. Heading into new chapters ends up being pretty exciting, since you have no idea what the next crazy location will be. Outer space is the first environment that's really out there. While the Mario Galaxy titles have done plenty with this setting, it's not used much throughout the rest of the series, and a rarity for Paper Mario in particular. Unfortunately, they don't take advantage of the potential space has to offer, but the final area, the Woe Zone, is one of the best designed levels in the game, with a unique gimmick of walking on walls and ceilings to get around. The Land of the Cragnons follows, a prehistoric location and another uncommon theme for the Mario series. This iteration even has cavemen, as well as walking, talking flowers. It's a silly chapter with highs and lows, and markedly unique. But honestly, those themes are pretty generic compared to the most out there concept this game presents: the Mario equivalent of heaven and hell, the over there and underwear. Super Paper Mario was not afraid to tackle darker subject matter. Visually, these are cool places to explore, and a really fun take on where things go when their games are over. It's kind of a train wreck when looking at what some of these levels are made up of, but I'll touch on that more later. Along with the settings, a lot of moments are scattered throughout the game that leave a strong impression. There's the quiz show to figure out which is the real Merlee, the old-fashioned RPG battle against the Underchomp, and even feeding Peach various apples to wake her up with silly results for every wrong choice. Finally, the absolute best moment of creativity comes from the infamous super nerd chameleon Francis and his dating simulation game. This segment sees him attempting to romance Princess Peach in abject failure, with hilarious dialogue every step of the way, for one of the most entertaining sequences in the series. It's a whole lot of fun, and probably the biggest highlight of the entire game. You will not forget it. Number 2, novel story moments. Super's well known for sequences unlike anything Mario's seen before. Even the very first scene catches your attention, showing a wedding between Bowser and Princess Peach of all things. It's a shame the plot takes so long afterwards to really get going, but whenever it's focused on, it's easy to get into. The world-ending void is present from the very get-go, a massive abyss threatening to swallow all of existence. Despite Super's silly tone, this ticking clock provides a sense of urgency, always reminding you of the goal of your adventure and the stakes at hand. This is even capitalized on with the impactful moment in Sammer's Kingdom, where, unexpectedly, the void actually grows so large it destroys the world you're in. Heading back to the aftermath, you're greeted to a far-stretching view of empty nothingness. Only a few crumbles of the kingdom remain. This is a well-done sequence, showing the dangers and importance of your journey up front. And it doesn't let up there. The apparent assassination of Mario's group, sending you to the afterlife, is another effective turn of events, and clever introduction to the next chapter. It's hard to know what's going on at this point in the game, and the unpredictability's exciting. The story picks up in the final chapter, with appropriate build-up. The final boss, a monstrous combination of Luigi and Dimentio, is perfectly disturbing for Super's bizarre tone. It's a complete joke in providing a compelling battle, but a cool moment for Dimentio's character, and satisfying for the finale. If you ever wanted to see the Mario series try new, weird ideas, Super Paper Mario has a lot to show you. Number 3, characterization and writing. One of the biggest reasons moments work so well is because characters have strong identities. Count Bleck and his entourage are by far the standouts of this game, and some of the most endearing villains the series has seen. Each of them has a distinct design, ability, and personality, so it's a lot of fun watching them play off of each other and try to get the leg up on Mario's group. Although they can be a bit one-note, by the end of the game they're all quite likable. Dimentio's worth highlighting for adding another dimension to the story, ultimately plotting to betray Count Bleck to take all worlds for himself. The way he's presented guarantees he's one of the most interesting elements of the story, and his constant scheming helps create a memorable finale because of how much it's built up. Bleck's assistant Nastasia also deserves a call-out for her uniquely nonchalant way of keeping minions in line. It's refreshing for the Paper Mario series to have a main party that consists of pre-established characters, and fun to see Peach and Bowser out and interacting with the world and each other in more unconventional ways. Unfortunately, they have far fewer scenes than you'd think, and even worse, don't have much to do with anything going on. Since Super goes for a chosen hero's prophecy angle, the usual Mario crew feels kind of irrelevant to the main plot, and it would be nice if they had more personal relevance in some way. Bowser also has kind of a poor showing, coming off as more childish and unthreatening than ever. Luigi's also uncharacteristically brave a few times, but his brainwashed alter ego Mr. L more than justifies his glorified appearance in this game. Seeing him play the bad guy with a bloated opinion of himself is amusing and original. It's nice to see him play an essential role in this series for a change. Pixls also exist and get flack for how one-note and non-present they are, but I look at them more as tools for puzzle solving than meaningful partners. If anyone deserves more attention, it's the main party, but Tippy is more than enough for what this story is focused on. I really want to highlight just how entertaining the dialogue and writing in this game is. Even the lackluster NPCs stand out a lot more thanks to the writing. It's all very well balanced, and ensures spending time with this cast is an enjoyable time. Number 4, the theme of love. What stands out about Super's storytelling is that it's about much more than just stopping someone who wants to take over, or in this case destroy, the world. Love is a theme that's easier for people to get into, and this game presents love in several different forms. This not only lends Super a distinct identity, but makes it likelier you'll be engaged with the story since it's based more in emotions. The main narrative is focused on Tippy and Count Bleck's relationship, slowly pieced together as the game goes on in short flashbacks expressing how they met and the tragedy that followed. It's not a complicated story by any means, but the way it's written with clear motivations for the characters makes it easy to care. It's surprising how well it works, and impressive for the Paper Mario series. Knowing their history makes the ending a lot more interesting. Seeing them reconcile and come to terms with being together, whether in this life or the next, makes for a touching and tasteful ending. After the credits, outside of a brief shot of two figures in the distance, they're never seen again, perfectly fitting the fantasy element to their story. It's just nice to know in some way they're off living their lives happily. And the ending feels rewarding because something more came out of it than just returning things to peace. This is one of the most fulfilling endings the Paper Mario series has seen, at least narratively. Like I said, love's focused on throughout the adventure. The pure heart in Fort Francis is straight up born from Tippy's feelings towards Mario for rescuing her. Squirps has a cute scene expressing the love between a mother and son. King Crocus, the leader of the Florosapians, kidnapped Cragnons out of love for his people, since the Cragnons were endangering them by polluting the water. But the biggest showcase of love, beyond Tippy and Bleck, is none other than Lovebee, one of my favorite characters for how hilariously vicious she is to the main party. That happens when you're unapologetically sincere. Her ultimate fate's tragic, in that she herself is actually the pure heart, and must cease to exist with a well-done scene of her talking to her her parents before coming to terms with her fate. It's a captivating conversation. A shame then that the post-game tramples all over this by pointlessly bringing her back, but at least it's such a footnote you can kind of ignore it. In any case, the focus on love promises one of the more emotional experiences Mario's ever been a part of. I don't think this is the best Mario story ever like a lot of fans, but it's certainly the biggest success of what Super sets out to do. Number 5, a lot of little things. I'm just gonna list these off. Leveling up feels great when it happens, since it comes with a full heal and increases your HP or attack power. This encourages you to stomp pretty much anything you see, since taking out enemies is almost always rewarding on some level. Catch cards are fun to collect and even benefit you by multiplying damage against the appropriate enemy. These easily could have just been collectible cards with no effect, so I'm grateful most of them have benefits. The ones showing partners from the previous games are especially cool. Super actually has a lot of references to other games, even beyond Paper Mario, which helps the world feel more connected to the rest of the series. I like how new chapters are drawn before walking onto them. It's a nice presentation choice. After the crappy casino in the Thousand Year Door, Super's arcade games are actually fun and have some depth. Between maps, catch cards, ingredients, and pipes, there's a lot to use coins on. There's even Tiptron in post-game, and I love when a common currency has good value. Finally, Super has a large amount of optional content. There's treasure hunting, filling out recipes, collecting catch cards, the Piccolo side quest, the Duel of 100, and 2 Pits of 100 trials, one of which you have to finish twice. The pits are appreciated as the most challenging content the game has, and enjoyable to conquer. Most of these side attractions are grindy and don't reward your efforts as well as they could, but I'll get into this more later. All the same, that covers the best qualities of Super Paper Mario, and you might have noticed I spent almost all of this time talking about the game's story, characters, and ideas. What about the gameplay, level design, mechanics, combat? Well, we won't delay this any longer. It's time to talk about all that and more as we discuss the worst things about Super Paper Mario. The worst. Number 1, unwelcome changes. Like I said earlier, Super Paper Mario is a tremendous step away from the previous titles. The most disappointing thing about this is very little of what's replaced the cherished gameplay of the past is designed well. 3D environments are largely gone, only existing when you flip, and even then they're ugly, empty boxes. The 2D style this game goes for is a major downgrade from the balance previous titles struck, making for far less charming and believable worlds. I'm surprised they managed to feel as charismatic as they do, but the writing really gets all of the credit. A 2D style could have looked really nice, but this art direction looks so shallow and cheap it's hard to get into it. It's like you're playing a paint program. The minimalist approach for new characters and enemies doesn't help. They're way too basic and rarely make an impression. Again, the writing does all of the heavy lifting. Gameplay's been completely overhauled, tossing out the turn-based RPG format for jumping on enemies like a 2D platformer. And this comes with a lot of issues. Combat's barely combat now, and almost every confrontation feels the same since it's just about jumping on the enemy's weak point. Enemies and even boss fights are incredibly simple and easy to defeat, all the way to the end of the game. Even the final boss is a total pushover. This new format is way too abusable, with all sorts of cheesy strategies, so fights rarely have depth and just aren't interesting. The lovable battle system of the previous titles is abandoned for absolutely no benefit. I'm all for trying out new ideas, but Super Paper Mario's so poorly executed it makes you wonder why changes were made at all. It's different for difference sake, and feels conceptually underdeveloped. Ultimately, Super overly relies on its dialogue to carry basically everything else, and ends up being a crutch to hold up tedious game design. Combat, level design, flipping, so many new changes that it's all over the place. I don't care if Paper Mario wants to step away from the turn-based RPG format, but if you're going to do that, do it for something that's actually worth it and fun to play. Number 2, flipping. Flipping's a poor mechanic. It's only used interestingly a few times, and is so underdeveloped, I'm hard-pressed to even call it the central mechanic. For what's supposedly a major feature of the game, it hardly ever plays a role in combat, and is mostly used to overcome obstacles. Progressing this way rarely feels organic. It ends up being something you just remember to use when you hit a dead end, so you flip, and all of a sudden you have a path forward. It's very unintuitive, since it's hard to know when something's hidden in 3D. You end up having to flip constantly if you don't want to miss things, which is tedious thanks to the terrible decision from the developers to put a time limit on how long you can stay flipped. This might be the most detrimental choice made during development. Instead of allowing you to freely roam and explore in 3D, which would have been a lot more tolerable, you have to contend with a ticking clock whenever flipping. And if the timer runs out, you take 1 point of damage. Then it starts all over again. Huh? So why did you include it in the first place? The time limit only discourages you from wanting to explore in 3D. 1 damage is so insignificant, you can get away with ignoring it altogether, but then why did you add it to the game? It's such a senseless choice. With how much you have to flip and how slowly the gauge fills back up, it makes exploration so tedious it's not even worth trying to mitigate such minimal damage. I fully believe taking out the limit gauge would only have made the game more fun to play. You can even unlock that very ability, but it's completely wasted as the reward for completing the Flopside Pit of 100 trials a second time. Likely one, if not the last thing you do in the entire game, so it barely gets any use and is a total waste. Were they worried you just run past enemies if you could stay in this form? That's possible anyway, and speaks more to the flaws of enemy and level design in general. Are you seeing now how none of this feels thought out? Flipping as a mechanic has so much potential, but no idea what to do with itself. The pointless addition of a timer just makes you hate using it, turning exploration into a restrictive, time-consuming chore. It doesn't help that Mario's the only one who can do it either, since it discourages playing as anyone else, since you'll have to keep switching back to him. Number 3, level design. Levels aren't designed with much rhyme or reason, so they're confusing to get around. Progression is uncharacteristically ambiguous for a Mario game. Since platforms and blocks are so scattered, it feels unnatural to move through these environments. Exploring just isn't fun due to how often you have to go into the menu. A lot of stuff seems to exist in place of compelling level design, and the game's not afraid to troll the player. In fact, it's a common occurrence. When you break levels down and remove their dialogue, most of them are really bare bones. Super does everything it can to stretch its content, but because of that, a lot of it feels like filler. When you look at the entire first chapter of Lionland, it's so generic it's boring. Most individual chapters don't have much of a narrative, but since combat is one note and exploration is tedious, Super has to rely on its writing to keep you engaged. But because it takes a while for the overarching story to get going, the lackluster gameplay has to carry it until things get good. They really didn't know how to fill areas with more interesting gameplay. Rectangles that move you around the environment with no interaction feel like they're here to give the illusion of level design, but are just a waste of time. Megastars, which are a cute idea, always amount to holding right until the power-up wears off. A cute novelty that doesn't offer anything else. Super manages to make outer space of all things boring, a concept you can do so much with, and instead you get a fetch quest to buy a chocolate bar. And man, does this game love mazes. Maybe it's just the fact that areas look so samey, but there are more than a few aimless sections with nothing clever about how to get through them. You just have to tough it out. It's not all bad. The aforementioned Woe Zone and Gap of Crag are solid places to explore, with cohesive ideas and progression. But beyond that, a lot of Super is busy work, padding chapters out with nonsense, which brings me to number 4, padding. Levels are overflowing with arbitrary things to fill time. Unapologetic backtracking is expected multiple times throughout the game, treated like it's okay because the game knows what it's doing and it thinks it's funny. It's very similar to the General White scenario from the Thousand-Year Door, and is unacceptable here as it was there. This game just doesn't know what to do with its time, and overly relies on silly dialogue and situations. Let's list some out. The Ruby farming chapter has you run in a hamster wheel for roughly 10 minutes to farm rubies, and necessary to complete the level if you don't look things up online. This is done as early as chapter 2. Talk about a crazy decision to throw this at you when the game's barely started. I wouldn't blame anyone if they quit by this point. Underwear Road has you run through it several times when talking to the hags, and for no other reason than to stretch it out, and have you jump up monotonous platforms over and over. One of the hags doesn't even give you anything, and instead delivers a long rant about her love life. Yeah, the Over There stare follows with the quest to find the apple to wake up Princess Peach, but this place sucks to get around. It's an inevitably time-consuming quest, and even after giving her the right one, the game throws another character at you further on who wants another apple, so you have to head back and search all over again. It's insanely trivial. And we can't forget the Cragnon block puzzle, something so unbelievably obnoxious it literally has you type in the word please 5 times for the solution to move forward. And even then, it's 25 inputs long. The game even tells you to write it down. The padding is constant, showing little consideration for the player's time or engagement. Running around to find a space helmet, drifting through space where everything looks the same, fighting 20 nearly identical fights in a row with too many interruptions. Filler, plain and simple, and there's even more when it comes to side content. Number 5, unrewarding side content. A lot of Super's side attractions aren't rewarding for the time they require. The main exception I'll highlight right off is Dashel, for completing the Flipside pit of 100 trials. He's a huge speed boost and immensely convenient for getting around, and thankfully, reasonable to acquire before beating the game. Everything else though, woof. This stuff is really only for completionists. The Flopside pit, while a good challenge, only rewards you with catch cards. The permanent flipping ability is only acquired after completing it twice, and like I said, this'll likely be one of the last things you do in the game, so it's barely useful. Your first time through, you don't get anything beyond the catch cards, and are for no good reason tasked to go through the whole thing again to actually be able to fight the boss. Talk about bullshit. This is inexcusable padding just to get a few more hours out of you in post-game. The Duel of 100 is even worse and far more tedious, having to load a different room for each individual fight, with dialogue before and after every single one. While a lot of these words are humorous, it's insanely boring to complete, and even though the 1000-Year Door catch cards are a cute novelty, they're absolutely not enough for something that takes over an hour to complete. Piccolo's side quest is an obvious example of wasting time. The whole thing is running around, talking to different characters in different places, and then talking to them all again in reverse. Again, writing-wise, there's some funny stuff here, but Piccolo is by far the most useless Pixl in the game, making the whole thing a deliberate farce. While I complimented the arcade games earlier, the payouts for bothering with them are atrocious. The only worthwhile rewards cost way too much. You'd have to spend hours playing these games to buy a single one. It doesn't feel good to crush a minigame and be given 36 tokens for your effort when 2,500 are needed for the best things. It's an unavoidable grind if you bother with it, so it ends up being a total waste. Charms in this game are a lot worse than the charms in the first 2 Paper Marios. I honestly kind of hate them. The only benefit is occasionally getting an item thrown at you, that half the time isn't useful, and certainly not worth the coin investment since you have no control over what you get. Also, interrupting the action mid-jump is just annoying. The whack-a-catch card is another monotonous task if it doesn't show up in the card shops. You have to buy a total of 300 items to get it. Mind-numbing for sure if you want a complete collection. Recipes and maps are also very time-consuming, but is that really a surprise at this point? Before we wrap up, I'll also say a lot of items are overpowered, most notably the block, and PAL pills are just annoying, and can mess up your jump combos. There you have it. Despite how it might seem, I don't dislike this game, but poor decisions are noticeable in almost every area of its design. As I've said plenty of times already, Super Paper Mario is carried by its writing. While the story has great moments, it doesn't make up for the shortcomings the rest of the game suffers from. This game, plain and simple, doesn't know what to do with itself. While its narrative and characters are interesting, nearly every other aspect feels aimless, unrewarding, and clunky. At the very least, the endearing storyline and out-of-the-box ideas guarantee there are things to appreciate here. If you're a Paper Mario fan, there's a good chance you'll have a fun time with this one. It has a dedicated fan base that's alive and well after all. But there's no denying it's a polarizing entry, one you'll either see the light in or drop altogether. Thank you all so much for watching. If you liked my video, subscribe and check out my Patreon. Thank you so much to all of my patrons for your support. I will see you next time.